right, that was a disaster. I should be live now. I did these last year and everything worked fine when I did like this. So if you're new here, welcome. My name on the internet is Barry Horse, and I bet these games for a living. I'll explain what that means in a minute. But I do want to just explain kind of what these games might or might not be worth, whether you should or should not follow, how I come up with them, and set like some reasonable expectations for what it means to attempt to beat a completely painted number on Friday afternoon for the football. So I'll try screen sharing now. And I should be good to go. Okay, so what I mean when I say I bet these games for a living is that I have actual opinions, and I'm not just bowing down saying the market is always right about it, and there's no room for any actual edges. So as an example, like right now, it doesn't really take a genius to see that if you want to bet San Jose tonight at circa, you can lay 13.5. The reason I'm winning is not because I find little micro edges where I barely devig myself by assuming Chris Pinnacle or some weighted average of the two is the right price on the game. Nor am I trying to like scalp different stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's lots of people who make great earn. Frankly, if you're new to gambling and don't know anything about me and this is all new to you, I probably would say don't listen to me. Try and find a way to where you can average laying 2.5 on 1,000 football games that close 3, or the rough equivalent of that. I can almost 99.999% guarantee that after 1,000 plays in a real market like football, you will have won. And that experience will teach you a lot. If you're not born yesterday, understand everything I just said, and are not stupid enough to think that nobody in the history of the world has ever beaten a market, and that anyone who's ever outperformed the S&P 500 is not just some benefactor of survivorship bias and luck, and that there are actual edges in the world that are out there. I'll kind of go over a little of my approach. So I'm what would be called like a originator, handicapper, whatever you want to call it, where as one dumb, simple example, this San Jose game tonight, I might say should be 16.5 or 17, meaning everybody in the world has had, well, for these games, like 2 months to bet probably, millions, probably tens of millions of dollars on each side of this game, where we've had a price discovery process where the weighted average of all these participants have just agreed this game should be 14. And I'm attempting to say, no, all of you are wrong and I'm right. And all these painted numbers are good. I'll go into why I do that, because as you might imagine, that's significantly more difficult and significantly more stressful and significantly more uncertain than the first way of just laying 2.5 1,000 times on games that close 3. I'll explain why I do this in a bit.
Limit increase.
How I do this could be a whole series I'm not going to yap and waste all your time with. Definitely my background's on the math nerd science side. Probably around 5 years ago, I've shifted to not like old school handicapper methods and stuff, but just understanding the value of information. And I've basically at the point right now where with football, it's possible. There's 50 to 60 college football games in a week. It's not unreasonable to watch with how they cut up the games now. You can watch all the non-garbage time snaps of every FBS team, and you're not going to be much over 30, 35, 40 hours to do that. And you can watch all the coaches' press conferences. And yes, 95% of all the time I spend on that's a complete waste. But the 5% that's not a waste is really, really valuable. And if all you get from these streams is me kind of being such a freak psycho that I want to spend 60 hours a week consuming all that content and distilling it down in 1 hour or 2 hours for this call for you, happy to do that. If you want to just shut up and follow, happy to do that. If you think these games are going to move like I do and you want to just scalp them, go ahead and do that. I really don't care. I'm going to be doing these calls. I don't think it's costing me much. I could be wrong about that. I think it's going to help me more than it doesn't. We will see. So yeah, what I do is very strange. You're basically 24/7 teetering this line of, to even think you'd have a chance to say, no, all of you who are intelligent, know all this information, bet all these millions of dollars, all of you are wrong. San Jose should be 16.5. Takes an insane amount of like bold, borderline arrogance and confidence to say, and especially to keep saying and doing after you've inevitably lost 8 of these in a row. Like, no, I've lost lots of money doing this. I'm going to keep, saying I'm the best. I know all of this. I know what I'm doing, and you guys don't. It's a pretty weird statement to make for most people. And you're consistently balancing that with, as I've explained before, there's two types of gamblers on this planet: those who are humble and those who are about to be. And you definitely want to be in bucket one, in my opinion. And these markets are highly well-informed and moderately efficient, compared to other markets in the world. But they're not the best, and they're not always perfect. So a little about like why I wait, and so people following can decide what they're doing. I'm betting real opinions, and I'm betting real money. And like, as you can see right now, taking down this whole market on San Jose, I would phrase it this way probably is, if you're betting 4 figures or less, you should be ready to bet on like Sunday afternoon when these games come. If you're betting 5 figures, you should probably be betting Monday, Tuesday. If you're betting totals, maybe Wednesday. If you're betting 6 figures, anybody who would want to bet 6 figures on one of these games tomorrow would have done it this morning. And all the moves you're going to see tomorrow are people who are dying to bet high 6 figures and 7 figures. That's kind of like the average scale of liquidity for these. I see a comment already. No, San Jose is not a play. I'll be clear when I have one. And so, yeah, you can make really high leverage decisions if you're willing to wait until these markets are really efficient. And to me, I sort of hear a lot of people talk about these markets as this like linear trade-off of, you either, if it's easy to bet a lot, it's very hard to win. If it's hard to bet a lot, it's probably easy to win. And it's like this 2-dimensional trade-off where you can bet rigged Russian ping pong and mistake lines and, find obvious errors like I'm sure exist right now on some of these outs. But you're not going to be able to bet millions of dollars, and your job's going to be consistently replenishing those outs. Or you can try and bet right now in this range of things, but you're barely going to win, if at all. And I don't really view it in that 2D. I view it a lot more like a trilemma, where you're trading off 3 things, which is volume, edge, and liquidity. So, and that basically you can and probably should be trying to optimize for 2 of those 3. And so what I see a lot of people doing is they aim for high edge and high volume, but low liquidity, meaning maybe you can bet a dime, 2 dimes, whatever early, but you're going to have thousands of bets. Your ROI is going to be 5, 6, 7, maybe 10% if you're betting props and stuff. And you're just going to win all of these units. But in terms of what those units mean in what I care about, which is Bitcoins, or for some people who haven't reached that level of enlightenment yet, dollars, will be maybe a lot lower than what I see most people who aren't that doing, which is prioritizing volume and liquidity with a really low edge. Maybe they're trying to grind out MLB money lines right at first pitch, these football games right now, and they're still trying to bet maybe thousands of games, maybe bet billions in a year, but they're happy to have an ROI of 0.5%, 1%. My approach to these markets is a little different in that trilemma, where the 2 I pick are liquidity and edge, and I sacrifice volume and have lower plays. And of course, that exposes me to more volatility, because if you're only going to have 150 bets in a year, let's say, unless your expectation is pretty decent of a pretty decent edge, 1 or 2 bet, like if your ROI is going to be 0.5% or 1% there, your expectation in a year is to win 1 or 2 units. Yeah, if you can bet $1 million on all the games, and that's like a highly profitable, good idea. But for most people, it's not a great way to earn a living if some percent of the year, like 30% of the years, you're going to lose money just because your EV is plus millions of dollars. It's not really making a lot of sense. And so that's just how I view markets. I really do believe, it's not even a belief, it's completely obvious edges that big exist. Whether someone like myself or someone better than me attempting to do this is talented, hardworking, skilled enough, whatever words you want to use, to be able to identify those edges with decent precision and recall is sure up for debate. But the evidence for the last decade is that I am able to do that. So yeah, that's kind of how I view stuff. I'll go into, let me stop sharing the on screen for a second, and then I can share. think I can just share my entire screen. Give me 1 minute. All right, cool. So yeah, as you can see, last year I did these calls. NFL, I barely won. I have nothing to hide. If you want to try and handicap the handicapper of like Barry Horse is really good in October, but worse than the others, feel free. I don't think that's that smart. To the extent that any of this would have been actual signal in the past, I am a living, breathing human who is like thinking about these things and adapting as I go. So like, it's been probably 5 years in a row now where my best month of the year has been October. I don't think that's random, especially the way I'm doing things now. And the ROI in September has been positive, but very small for 5 or 6 years in a row now, where before September used to be the best. I don't think that's random, but again, I wouldn't try and I'm going to skip the September games and only bet the October games because I'm obviously aware of this and accounting for it in my bar and burden of proof to bet a game. So I'll track all this in BetStamp. I'll be as clear as possible whether something is a game or not. I'm going to talk about all these games. People want to hear them. I'm going to have opinions on almost every game and have leans, whatever. None of this is to have some risk-free way of touting something later that I had this great opinion. It's just, I'm trying to be as helpful as possible. It clearly worked pretty damn well for Mr. Walters. If maybe you're watching this, you have 17 other handicappers that you care about. And if 11 of them really like a game, one of them is against it and 6 have no opinion, maybe that's pretty decent. If 14 of them love a game and the other 3 have no opinion, that's probably very good. If 5 like it, 6 like the other side, and 6 have no opinion, you want to leave it alone. And I'm one of those 17 for you. Feel free. I don't think that's a stupid idea. I'll tell you what I think about everything. And when I can, stuff on injury. Obviously, I'm going to protect certain relationships I have and not blow stuff up if I have a really good piece of information that I only have. But yeah, that's as for how I come up with these. That's kind of the point of these calls. Would I have cared, and do I still care a lot today and a lot more 10 years ago, that on average, opponent adjusted success rate is probably a more predictive metric for a football team succeeding in future weeks than unadjusted average yards per play? Yes, obviously. But do I care, frankly, a lot more about if I've stalked Western Kentucky's quarterback on Instagram? I found his high school ex-girlfriend and DM'd her, figured out some way of asking her politely whether he's going to play this week or not. She rage follows him still for revenge and says, no, he's not playing. He's in the concussion protocol. He might play next week, and he's worth 7 points, and the market's not pricing that in at all. Yeah, I care way more about that than any math number I could be sharing. So I do everything. Every game to me is kind of its own snowflake, and I price these all one by one because there's enough time to do that. This isn't like college basketball. So yeah, I don't think I'm missing anything else obvious other than, as you can see in these expectations, I should go over a losing streak. And kind of so you can see the season. The reason I feel good having a halftime service is it's a much bigger edge than what I expect to have right now against a painted Friday number in the football. So if you want, just take one example. Let's say we're going to be 55% right now on Fridays for this year. Let's say we're going to have 100 bets this year. I'm not guaranteeing that'll happen, but just as an example, if that really was the true win rate, well, you got to win 53 of them just to not lose money. So what's the odds that you're just not losing money? Forget having a good year. This is you win half a unit. It's just 7 out of 10 years. 3 out of 10 years, you're going to lose money if that's what the edge is. To me, that's not a way to make a living. That's a fun, profitable hobby where I'm not really costing myself much. I hope this goes well like it did last year. It doesn't have to. Now, could I maybe be underestimating myself? I don't know. Maybe you can see what this changes to. It gets 76%. You can see what these numbers would have to be to where you'd be preposterously likely to always have a winning year. You'd need a pretty big edge to get this up into the mid and high 90s. You need to be, to me, a practically impossible win rate. So what would I love to have for this season is I would consider 10 units right now against a painted Friday number stellar. Say we have 100, 150 bets. I would consider that phenomenal. If you're watching this and you don't understand that Degenerate Gambler 69420 on Twitter flips 200 coins this year, goes 120 and 80, so they win 32 units on 200 bets. And you're like, wow, this guy's a genius. He's way better than Barry Horse, without realizing he's literally just flipping coin has no idea what's going on, and it's just, there were 10,000 random degen 69 420s. Some of them are going to run out good to the second, third, fourth, fifth standard deviation sometimes. These videos might not be for you. So I'm sorry to yap, but I want to make expectations as clear as possible with this, which is like, we're not stealing right now. Anybody who's telling you that is lying or doesn't really understand markets, or they're the best gambler of all time, which maybe they are. I mean, feel free to believe that. Then the really last thing, and I'll finally talk about the San Jose game, is I don't want to insult or disrespect anybody's religion. As far as we know for sure, we all get one life on this planet. If the way you want to spend your one for sure single life on this planet is consistently shit posting, shit talking, being negative, and I click on your page and I see after your third negative comment towards me that 80% of what you put out into the world is just persistent negativity about why everyone's dumb and stupid, I will block you. I'm not being sarcastic. If that's really the way you want to spend your one time on this planet, is being like that, I'm not being sarcastic. Be that. I'm quite certain that's not how I want to spend my one time on this planet. I'm not above criticism whatsoever. I would love to hear where I'm wrong on stuff. You're never going to see anybody own losses as much or more than me on all of these. Every week I'll come back and recap these. I'll show you right now. Like, I'm like, I don't want to make it seem like I'm not fun or you can never make fun of me. Like, I'll do it right now. I had one of the worst bets that's ever been made in the history of football. I bet Tulsa last year. I think I had a pretty good CLV. I think they closed a decent favorite, but we took one with Tulsa in the last game of the regular season last year and they lost by 45. So, please roast me for these. Like, I'm down for all of this, but if all you do is just consistently tell me how stupid I am or some idiotic Keynesian lens of the world, I'm just going to remove you from my internet experience. I really don't need your view that bad. Negativity to me is really contagious, just like positivity is. I care a lot about that. So I'm more worried about that with Twitter. I've seen YouTube be like a lot more positive of a place for that. We'll see. I don't know why that is. But yeah, feel free to say whatever you want, but I'm not going to just like consistently see repeated disrespect and idiot stuff. So yeah, follow these if you want, fade them if you want, arb them if you want, listen for the synopsis of 70 hours a week of film and coach press conference breakdowns into an hour or two if you want. I'll share what I think of these games. So as for the first one, I'll be really clear, there's no bet. I call me a dinosaur, use power ratings to just get a frame of reference for stuff. Of course, there could be 17,000 different reasons to bet a game, but I am discretionary in how I bet everything. So like, there hasn't been one bet in my life in the last 5 or 6 years where I just have this computer model or spreadsheet or whatever. It spits out on Monday that San Jose should be 15. I lay 11 early in the week, and then I move on and live my life. I used to bet that way. That's not how I do things now. When we're at this stage of the market, there's way too many like weird things to start caring about, and I spend time caring about all those little weird things. Power ratings wise, and just for real quick context, I know people want to hear about the games. 0 is an average team for me in everything, pro and college. I know some people use like weird scales for college sometimes. Typically, not always. Like this year, the best team I think is much worse than this. Typically, the best team in the country in the beginning of the year is somewhere around a +30. The worst team is somewhere around -30. If you followed me last year, you'll know Kent State is definitely worse than a -30 and probably will be this year. And there's room to be above that. Like I'm not exaggerating, and I'm very strict with these numbers and conservative, frankly. I would fight to the death, basically, that 2019 LSU at the very end of the year in January was a +44, +45. Like I really strongly believe that. NFL best team starting a year will usually be like +6-ish, worst team -6-ish. When the Panthers bottomed out with all their injuries with Bryce Young 2 years ago, they're probably close to a -10. Like these outliers exist. The king shit Ravens, who were like 6-point favorite, 5.5-point favorites in the AFC title game 2 years ago, they were probably rated, probably correctly so, as around like a +8. Like there's room to grow to that as you get evidence. But yeah, that's like a frame for this. And of course, these games play to wildly different numbers based on different matchups, handicaps, information, funnels to one team could be good at covering as a favorite or not for different reasons. So that's kind of the whole point of these calls, is to go over that stuff. But San Jose, not really my opinion. kind of shared by everyone, is very clearly, I think, on its own tier as the second best team in the Mountain West. And if you wanted to freak out on Boise last night, which might make sense, I don't really want to do. It's one football game. We'll talk about the importance of not freaking out on all of these as we go. It's not like they don't have bodies where they couldn't compete on the field with Boise, and they wouldn't play them until the title game. So I think I saw 10-1. I'm not the greatest at pricing these, but if you want to bet them, I think it makes sense. I think this offensive coordinator for San Jose is like really, really good, and like probably will be a head coach next year or the year after. And this quarterback who didn't earn the starting job out of camp last year, but started maybe around the 5th or 6th game last year, is apparently playing at a really high level. San Jose weirdly spends money. Like they have a decent amount of like Silicon Valley types who pay for stuff. I'm just going to double check and make sure I have comments working. All right, a lot of comments. We're good. And yeah, so they're, probably somewhere in, if you like them, a -5 to start and could go more. Like they have real all conference of these like huge Polynesian defensive linemen again. It's a real roster. CMU, for a complete year zero rebuild with a new coach, weirdly has a lot of seniors and like players who have played snaps and last year's quarterback. There actually wasn't this much of like a crazy talent exodus. They were just horrible. And these directional Michigans, there's another one playing tonight with Western, are all kind of right there. Like you can't make them that much worse than -20. Like they're still real football players. They're nowhere near that like Akron level of the MAC. But none are, it's really hard to argue any could be that much better than -15 right now. So yeah, we're guessing on how Central Michigan's coach is going to run things, but it's not this like complete, like they're playing high school kids all over. I think the move made a lot of sense. If you were a part of it, I would just hold it. I would probably on numbers be making CMU to start like a -17, San Jose like a -6. I think that 11 would actually play pretty true on a neutral. And I can talk about this, I guess. Basically, there's the same effect that you've probably heard of by now of the West Coast teams playing at 10 a.m. body clock in the NFL on the East Coast. Same thing with baseball, being something on the order of 1% to 2%. Similarly, this is not quite to that severe. This would be more like 0.5%, but these East Coast time zone teams playing at what will be 10:30 p.m. body clock, and the most of the fourth quarter past midnight actually has in the blind been worth like around 0.5%. So probably play that up a little extra. It looks perfectly tight to me. I'd be lying if you had a strong opinion on these. I mean, the range on what you'd be pricing both of these teams would probably need to be 10 points wide in both directions. I mean, I have lots of opinions on both coaches and all the quarterbacks involved here, but yeah, App State said multiple quarterbacks could play. Someone clearly loves Charlotte. I can just tell you what they would have been last year. I mean, Charlotte would have spent almost all of last year, definitely the second half of last year, in the -20s, like easily. And App State would have been, a bad and super disappointing, but still like a middling Sunbelt team somewhere between -10 and -5. I was going to start out pricing this game around 5. It made sense. People took 7. I'm not really interested in betting App State. If you're dying for action at this price, that's the only way to go. But honestly, with a move this big, I would start bowing down and just realizing it's not like I'm on the phone with Dow Loggins all week knowing what's going on. And it definitely is possible somebody could. So there's no play for me here. All right, I will add this to BetStamp because I have a bet on this game. I'll be really clear right now before I say it. It is going to be for half a unit. There's not crazy strong material reasons for that. Mostly, to be really honest, it's just the track record of September being a little underwhelming. Could just be a small sample and mean nothing, but way better to underbet edges than overbet edges. Nobody's ever ruined their life underbetting. So I need somebody to teach me how to do graphics and stuff for these streams. But to me, Wake Forest -17.5 is a bet for half a unit. I have no idea if this will move. Kennesaw, to me, all of last year, like completely inarguably, was being priced pretty damn close to a -30. I'll get into like the new coaches and everything in a bit, but I mean, like they were like 24-point dogs at Western Kentucky. They were 8.5-point underdogs at home to Florida International. And there's not anybody in the world who could have ever had FIU anything but a -20 at any point last year. Like the market's just screaming at the top of its lungs. Kennesaw's around a -30 last year. Really, really bad. Now, complete overhaul. They've only existed as a team for like 10 or 12 years. They've only played one group of 5 team in the history of its program. I'll go into that game in a bit. But there's like such a different level of football of anything any of these players have played other than the quarterback, which I'll do in a bit. Now, they were running like a modified triple option basically with a running back at quarterback who literally has converted to be a skill position player this year, Bryson Daly, and are now going to start running the Kendall Briles stuff or Art Briles stuff. So I'm just going to assume, since there's probably new listeners this year, I honestly can't believe people don't break down these games like of who runs this stuff. Like if you watch USF Boise last night, USF with Golish runs it. Kennesaw is going to run it. Tennessee runs it. Ole Miss runs a version of it. These pace and space that start with Art Briles of going a million miles an hour, basically having 10 plays, all the run plays more or less being one giant ass quarterback sneak where you're just trying to go vertical. There's a really easy like breakdown of how the physicality matches up in blocking these. And then they'll try and hit 1 or 2 or 5 if you're Tennessee against a bad team of these deep crosser option routes that open up when you're doing this a million miles an hour. They just try to exhaust you, run a bunch of screens. There's really very minimal processing. It was really perfect for Joe Milton. And yeah, I just think it's like as important of a breakdown of realizing that's what a team does as facing Army or Navy at any point in the last few decades. Like it is that important to how you analyze it. They're going to be running that this year with basically the same players as last year. They're all recruited to run the option other than the quarterback. I'm going to give them some benefit of the doubt. The new defensive coordinator, I don't have too many strong opinions. He came from the Paris Musketeers in Europe. I am not lying. I did actually spend time this summer watching the Paris Musketeers last year in EFL or ELF, whatever they call it. I can't have too strong an opinion other than it's almost all the same players, and I've seen them struggle so severely against these running quarterbacks. Like if you go watch Jacksonville State last year, and there's a Kennesaw State fan I'm close with, actually, who knows them pretty well, who loved Jacksonville State that game. We bet them at halftime, if you recall. I think they're fried against like quarterback playmakers like that. And so, yeah, I really don't see any world where my median guess for them right now would be anything above a -25. I understand they had like some decent results last year. Like they beat Liberty on the field, but Liberty was horrible. And this was at a time everybody in the world knew Liberty was horrible. Liberty was still 27 on the road. I hate Wake Forest. I don't even think Wake Forest is good. The market probably is pricing Wake Forest down around -5. I'm not sure I strongly disagree that much, but they have spent some real money. They're somewhere in the top 20, 25 of imported transfers and snaps played. And whatever you want to say about Ashford, like a lot of his stops do make sense. Like Oregon was never going to make sense. That was never really real. Auburn was so he could play baseball, which Harsin was going to let him do. Harsin got fired the first year, and Freeze was never really into him from the very start and never wanted him to play baseball, and it was never going to make sense. And last year, as I understand, was a very legit competition with Sellers for most of the offseason. And right now, it's not really looking like that damning of evidence to lose a job to Sellers. So I can make zero, it doesn't exist, that Ashford's this prolific passer who's going to succeed in the NFL. I don't think that. Excuse me. And I don't want to like oversell that he's just going to go score 50 points for us here. But this guy's a really high-level SEC recruit who's played like real SEC games multiple times against the dog shit teams he's faced, like Akron last year at South Carolina. He's more than facilitated what all he's going to have to do here, which is basically run this kind of power running game with Rob Ezel, which if you don't know, not to make you feel old, if you recall in like the mid-2000s, there was a walk-on receiver at Alabama who went viral for a really good Nick Saban impersonation. He was the offensive coordinator at USA last year. He's the offensive coordinator at Wake this year. I think Dickert's a great coach building a real program. They have real enough players in real enough ACC positions where I mean, I honestly think I'm dragging them down to have them around -5. Like that's where they were last year with pretty joke players and a much worse quarterback situation. So now they have an NFL running back on gap and team abilities. I really would have to make this more than 20, and I'm just going to own it and look like an idiot. And I'm sure Kennesaw will win on the field now, but I don't remotely see. If I had to guess, because with every game that I feel confident betting, I need to know some reason why it's even there. Like, why is the market letting us bet this? I strongly think it's just generally the gap between what is pretty clearly the worst team in Conference USA versus a not competitive, but not Stanford level ACC team in Wake Forest. And my strong opinion with conviction is that it's nowhere near this gap. Like the one team Kennesaw's played when Kennesaw was a much better team 3 years ago in 2021 was against a horrible, rotten Georgia Tech Jeff Collins team when he was just about to get fired. That game played into the 20s and it was like 45-17, completely uncompetitive with a concession at the end. I'm not saying that's what's happening tonight. But yeah, and like, 17.5 to 18.5 is worth something. But if you miss the initial impulse, like I honestly do make this game like 20 and a half-ish with moderate conviction, to be honest, where you'd still be holding something decent at 18.5, in my opinion. I don't expect it to close there. We'll see. Auburn Baylor, I have nothing. Some Baylor betting during the week that's made a little bit of sense. Auburn's secondary is super young and inexperienced.
Limit increase.
Not a lot of people know how well Baylor finished last year. A lot of it's kind of scammy, to be honest. If you just want like the directions the programs are going, Baylor makes a ton of sense. But if you go on actual team quality, like just players on the field, it's really hard to make Auburn worse than a +10, like really hard. And I despise their quarterback. Like I don't think their quarterback can play at all. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I think this is like a completely joke quarterback. Jackson Arnold, we'll see. But Baylor still would be like, moderately below that, around probably a +7. Maybe make this Auburn 3 or 3 juice even on a neutral, and there'd be, real meaningful home here enough to make it where it is. I'm good enough where it is. I will say for DJ Durkin versus Dave Aranda, the total doesn't seem too right to me. It seems like a point and a half high, but I've bet nothing. I don't see any strong bet today. I'll talk more about this next week after all these teams who play this week play their games. This is starting to price a little too much uncertainty that Vegas is as bad as they looked, that Idaho State is as horrendous as we think. And, I'm half joking, but like there is some world we have to give probabilities to where like competing with Idaho State isn't a joke and the first time they'll ever play a game together. And in what's very likely to be the worst game they look all year in the first time they ever played together. I did see real defensive issues. I like Zach Arnett a lot. If you don't know, he's a Rocky Long disciple and had San Diego State really rolling at like a crazy power rating. I used to bet them a ton in like 2018, 2019. He lost his job somewhere around March and they made like a late scrapping hire to get Paul Gunther from the NFL from like years ago, if you remember him. I'm not sure how into coaching UNLV he is or what favor this was for Mullen or if they are into it. I have no idea. I'm just guessing. I'm going to have Sam Houston down probably in like the very low negative teens. I don't think this is like a completely disgusting scrap of a team. But, it's not going to go great this year, I doubt. Vegas, it's hard for me after watching last week to make them too much better than -10. So, like, to be honest, all the dog money at 10 made sense. What you have to figure out is if you can make this game 7 with conviction to where you really want to take it now at this secondary number, which I can't come close to doing. Could be a good game for half times. We'll see. So this came back a little right before I started the stream. At the end of last year, this would have been, probably flipped Colorado 4, maybe 4.5. I've seen a lot of people overstate this week 1, week 2 thing with elevation playing up in September for the home field advantage. And like just seemingly inventing stats out of thin air about the Denver Broncos covering at home in the first 2 weeks. This phenomena doesn't exist against the market number, at least. of the elevation being anything more than it normally is, or something extra in week 1 or week 2. I don't think that's a thing. My opinion, and it could make sense to me. I'm not one of these sports science people, but like it could make sense to me that maybe in the 80s or 90s, before people understood like proper hydration and nutrition and sleep and how dialed all these teams are when they go and travel up there are, and that now that's been mitigated. I don't know, but I would just be treating this frankly as like pretty normal. As worse as Colorado is likely to be, I still think it's aggressive to tank them too much below a 0 as a power rating. They would have been in the pretty high single digits at the end of last year, slightly ahead of where Georgia Tech would have been. Now, Georgia Tech in their games from last year is going to have a lot of samples where Haynes King either didn't play or played severely injured. And if the way you're coming up with these ratings is using data points from last year, I'd be skeptical using anything from the second half of the season for Georgia Tech. And there is a world where this is like a program completely on the rise. I'm thinking they're still somewhere in the mid single digits. I'll call them a 5. I'll call Colorado a 0. I guess I'd probably make this game more like 3 than 4, but I have very little conviction in both of this. I don't like Caden Salter like at all. But you know, he can operate an offense. We've seen it from 2 years ago, and it did look like last year at Liberty. Yeah, was he completely checked out? Obviously, but a lot of the rest of the team was, and he didn't have a ton around him. So we got 12 games to bet on or against these guys. I'll figure it out after this one. I don't see anything strong. Western Michigan, I'm expecting both quarterbacks to play. I'm pretty sure neither are great at all. My understanding is all the rumors out Michigan State being ready to spend close to 8 figures for Quinn Ewers and other guys with Magic Johnson's money is that was real. So I don't know what that reveals internally about their confidence or conviction level in what they have with Childs. Obviously, Smith picked him for Oregon State, and people have been hyping this guy up for like 3 or 4 years now. But definitely in the real games they've played, I've seen nothing to be crazy about. They were like in a complete 4-quarter war with a horrible FAU team last year in their first opener with this guy. What does that mean here? I don't know. I'm starting Michigan State probably still down at a 0. And honestly, like I just said, like these directional Michigans are all kind of right there together in like the -17-ish range. With this total and the travel, yeah, obviously there's some home, but I'm not betting Western Michigan, to be clear. But if you were a part of this move, unless you were a part of it because of information you had, like Western Michigan's just laying down or just something I don't know about how horrible this is set up to be for them, I do think that's a real coach. And like, I do pretty solidly lean Western at this current number. It's just, I don't need to be putting 11-10 right now on quarterbacks I hate on the first week of the year on August 29th. So good luck if you do. But my point, I guess, is if you were a part of the original move, that coming back could make sense, but it's up to you. So 17 got laid early in the week and then came back, I think, last night or this morning. Purdue's another team I'd probably throw out almost every game they played last year, to be honest. I mean, they basically completely quit and gave up the first game in. They have real players. I think this quarterback can operate like a legit enough Big Ten offense. We're going to learn a lot about this offensive coordinator from USC, but Barry Odom's been a fantastic coach, basically every year of his career. Almost everything he's done has aged very well. And he's kind of like the real first guy, in my opinion, from what I can tell from people who like really know ball around defense, of starting the like real 3-3-5 stuff that Iowa State does and everything. So I'd expect that here. Ball State was like kind of sneaky, not quite Kent State, but like right there with Akron of like really low -20s for most of the year. Again, that's not like a Barry Horse opinion. That's just what they were. I don't want to say Purdue's now like a 0. You know, they would have been priced for a lot of games last year around like something close to between -10 and -15. I mean, they can't physically be worse. So I'd be probably starting out Ball State around -24. Purdue, probably something around -4. I don't make this game 20, and it's not higher than that with home. These games probably play way down with a running quarterback with what this total is. Frankly, a running quarterback for both teams. So no strong opinion. We'll learn a lot. I mean, very well understood by the whole world at this point how addicted James Franklin is to covering. In my opinion, it's not actually even really about covering. I'm quite certain he knows the number usually. But if you watch like Maryland last year, I think was the last regular season game, it's just scoring and getting these guys snaps and opportunities in general. Like he really feels like these guys work hard to be able to play college football. And when the backups are in, he wants them to score touchdowns. Because the reason I bring that up is like he's covering numbers that are like 3, 4. Like I'm serious. Like if you haven't seen it, please go watch the end of Penn State Maryland last year. The last minute, it's nuts. Like really nuts. But he does this now for like 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and so the market's aware of it at this point. I actually really think this game probably would have been 41.5 in past years. I think it would have come 38.5 and been bet up to 41.5 on Friday, and I probably would have laid it. But right now it's perfect. If you want season prospects, I'm thinking of I'm pretty capped until we see it against a real team of elevating Penn State much above a 24-25 with Aller. I held them there pretty steady last year. I was on them a bunch with that price. So it's, I see people like them a lot more than me this year, which is weird. They are a very good gambling team for, frankly, games like this, but at this price, we're more than priced out. I'm not a fan of Chuba Purdy whatsoever in Nevada. The one game when Brendan Lewis was out last year versus Hawaii was a disaster. They could easily score 0. But, both offensive minds are obviously very familiar with each other. Kolonecki with Penn State and the Nevada guy both come from that like light pulled tight end safety manipulation way of doing offense. If you want to speculate on if that means under or over, go ahead. I don't think it means a thing. Here's another coach who clearly cares a lot about kicking the shit out of teams. Are they going to be able to this year? I don't know. I mean, Rourke's pretty good. Mendoza's operated real offenses and has looked real at times. I think he's still a different caliber than Rourke, like below, to be clear. Indiana, at their best, was priced in the very low positive teens, if not around plus 10s for a lot of last year. I think that's a pretty good number for what they were. Knowing that was sort of a sun run where they kicked up on a bunch of bullshit for 9 or 10 of the 12 games, I'd be cautious starting them there again, as much as I adore this coach. I still would feel a lot better making them like more like a 7 or 8 to start, and I'll be ready to get them up into like the high teens if there's more evidence of it's the same thing as JMU or last year. But that's where I'm starting them. Old Dom, I think, is playing. And I don't even have written down. I think they're playing both quarterbacks. I want to like this coach. I don't think there's much he can do here. They've had weird defensive line talent for how shit the program is. I'd be having them, well into the negative teens, probably a -14. The number's probably perfect. Lane, it made sense. At this point, you're completely gambling. I've spent a pretty real amount of time watching Idaho film from the last 4 years this summer for the New Mexico offensive coordinator. If you can't tell by now, the teams I really make my money on are like Kennesaw, New Mexico State. We'll get to Kent State next week, the teams I care about. I think the coordinator's good. I think the quarterback's dog shit is kind of my takeaway. People will remember Idaho competed in the game against Oregon last year and maybe use that as some data point. Precisely 0 of that had anything to do with it or working. Most of it was Oregon's offensive line struggling a lot. And honestly, a lot of it was just a completely undeserved final score. Like Oregon really did control the game much more than the final indicated. I mean, I could see this being like really low -20s, like really low. I'm going to start them out pretty close to that, around -27. Is this the game to do anything? I don't know. It's not really a well-kept secret. All anybody talks about is how bad Michigan's offense has looked in practice. I don't know. I've had enough people now to rave to me about this quarterback and how, if you don't know metrically, like not always, but usually, and we'll get to one of these in a second with this kid. But golf, NFL, college, MLB, everything, typically you're going to do better betting against like the random freshman, random rookie in all of these than you would be betting on. Obviously, there's different cases. Everyone's a snowflake. I price everyone on their own. But if you're just doing math on a prior of, okay, this 18-year-old is going to go quarterback in real FBS games, you would probably have him playing to a lower level than the recruiting numbers would indicate. I don't know. I'm not laying 110 to have a strong opinion here. Frankly, after this move, if the reason that happened was somebody guessing on a rumor from that, I would kind of want to think this is a fraction cheap. These huge number favorites do actually play up more than people think in week one, where they are so excited to play. But that said, at least with Harbaugh, Michigan's been atrocious with these numbers in some of these games. I'm extraordinarily uninterested. God bless you if you bet this. Two of my favorite teams to bet on, well, bet against, especially UMass. I'm completely guessing on this UMass coach about how this is going to look. I've researched all the coordinators. I'm lost. I don't think Rose can play at all, the UMass quarterback, to be clear. I like Simon for Temple a lot better. To be completely honest, I'm kind of dying to bet Temple. I think Temple's a lot closer to -20 and UMass is a lot closer to -30. And I'm bordering uncertain. Home field here is as close to 0 as it gets, but I'm not betting anything. On August 29th, don't really need to make some massive 11-10 on this Temple disaster. And I do think that, obviously the program has been able to be real numbers, like with Rule, Jeff Collins. The guy after Jeff Collins was a disaster. I honestly don't even think Drayton was that horrible. They might have been going in a direction we won't know. But, this guy did elevate Sam Houston a pretty real amount and honestly had one of the most impressive seasons in football last year. So I don't want to be against that guy building a program, but yeah, it's hard to make them more than -20 right now. Obviously, Syracuse got bet. I don't really get it. I think, again, some of this is still like rumors, kind of like the Michigan quarterback. To be clear, I'm not betting Tennessee. I am dying to. If you don't know already, like I said, like Kennesaw, like some of these teams we'll get to in a bit, Tennessee is going a million miles an hour still, and people have been complaining about this quarterback. For me, what I saw at App State, with all you got to do here is like sling out screens, don't be a complete idiot, and read what is usually really obvious option routes that you're trying to hit 3 or 4 of those in a game, and then just let your SEC running backs run massive quarterback sneaks basically and get vertical. I think he can do that. I could be wrong. I'd be guessing on Angeli. I know a lot of people were wanting to just play over Riley Leonard for the first month of last year. I don't know. It sounds like it was a really legit competition in camp until the end. That's slightly concerning, I think. But I'm also guessing ACC versus SEC, if you just take where they are, because most people are probably going to be on market right now with what Tennessee would be within the SEC, which is meaningfully down from last year, but still they're playing a lot of games in like the range of +20 last year. Like when they were really good with Hendon Hooker 2 years ago, they would have been all those games in like the low +20s. So yeah, I still have them at least a +15, frankly, and I lean towards thinking Syracuse is not much better than a 0. And
Limit increase.
Again, I don't even think it's that he loves covering or knows the number. I think he is way more. He knows the number than James Franklin, because this is so stupid. When they're like laying 30 and he's up 50 in the fourth quarter, he does stop. Franklin just never stops. But this guy, if the number's 30 and they're up 27 in the fourth quarter, this guy keeps going. Like, he seems a little bit more aware of it. When you're laying 13.5, that's more for when they're playing like Akron and Kent State. I don't really care here. It's not like, unless I'm way right about the team quality, it's not like the only thing that matters here is whether or not they choose to cover. Like, obviously 2 scores with what these money lines would be right now is like well within reason Syracuse could win this game. So no bet. We'll learn a lot. All right, this one's a little interesting. Zach Kitley, the FAU coach this week, was explaining what's happening in the trenches and was kind of honest about how he sees this going. He said he felt relatively confident about the interior defensive line, but literally said, honestly, I have no idea how our edges are going to compete against a real Power 4 team like this. He didn't sound overly confident. I like the guy a lot. 2021 Western Kentucky is one of my favorite teams ever. I think this will work eventually for them. It working today in the trenches against Maryland is debatable. I alluded to it earlier with this quarterback. He hasn't announced. He said he's going to announce it a minute before the game. I haven't confirmed it either. I'd be stunned if it's not the freshman at quarterback for Maryland, who I had no opinion of until a month or so ago. But after really diving into this, and again, I rarely like these freshmen. I think this guy might be like really good. the talent's really obvious. The thing I care way more about is whether or not they just see football. And again, it's a spring game. It's other dumb little stuff like that. But I think this guy really sees football. So we'll learn a lot when he starts playing real teams. But I'm fairly ready to start moving Maryland into the positives if he's as good as he thinks I am. I'm going to start them down around a 0 to begin. That's kind of seeming like where the market is. Frankly, I'd lean favorite again here. But it's nowhere near strong enough to play when I don't really know what this quarter is going to be. I will say for FAU, their plan, they feel good about right guard and right tackle. They're using a center they have no idea is going to play all year, but is just old enough to get them lined up. Kitley did not sound overly optimistic. And I think it's a figure of speech, but he was saying the left tackle, Nonar, I think is his name, was a tight end on the roster last year. That wasn't like, it was more like a sixth offensive lineman jumbo package guy. But, he is right in that he hasn't really started at left tackle against teams like Maryland. And I also will say, here's another one, like Penn State and Tennessee, which is Loxley, has killed a lot of these teams. Now, usually it's when they play like Furman or Towson and teams like that. I think they played Long Island one year. That's not obviously what FAU is. So lean Maryland, but it's nothing strong. I'll put this on Betstamp because there's a bet in the Virginia game. Let me find it. Sorry, I gotta find somebody to help me produce this. I didn't make graphics and stuff. I just picked the winners. This is not my specialty. All right. So this one's going to be half unit again. Part of it is price. Part of it is it being August. But I'm going to track this as Virginia -12, -110. I'll try a 12.5. 12.5 looks fair enough because there's a 13 here. I think 12.5 is fair. So Virginia 12.5 for half a unit. No secrets, but Virginia has spent in the top 20 of money on this. I think even more than that on transfers. I'll start with quarterbacks. I guess I have to use first names. Both quarterbacks are named Morris. Chandler Morris, the Virginia quarterback. I think some people forget, he very legitimate. It was not the plan going into TCU's Sun Run title season 3 years ago now was not Duggan or Max Duggan, however you say it. It was a legitimate win from Chandler Morris to be the quarterback that year. And he got hurt in the first game at Colorado. Duggan came in. He was fine enough in that game to cover against one of the worst Power 5 teams we'll ever see. And just kept the job and ended up, I think, second in Heisman that year. But this is a real, obviously everyone knows his dad, but this is a real quarterback with real pedigree who I thought played great at North Texas. So things just weren't going to work out at TCU. I don't really hold that against him. I thought he had a pretty damn good year last year. And I think this guy's a real quarterback and frankly, much realer than anything they've had since Brennan Armstrong. And what we've seen from Brennan Armstrong lately isn't wow, maybe Bryce Perkins, maybe earlier. I don't know. One thing I'm very positive of, which is even after losing their two best tackles to injury months ago, This is very, very easily the best offensive line Virginia's had in 3 years. If you haven't been following them closely, the first year with Elliott was one of the most disastrous injury situations that offensive line I've ever seen. They have not really been competing with a real full ACC roster for 3 years, and I think they very much are. I'll get into injuries for this game. So part of why this may have been cheap is, I guess it's non-spank odds. Their best safety, Antonio Clary, is out this game. He might play next week. That's not certain. And one of their better linebackers, Cam Robinson, who was hurt almost all of last year as well, is also not playing this game. I think he's probably out more like multiple weeks, but probably not more than a month. This receiver who is on spank odds matters a lot. Charles Harris, he's like the explosive fast one for them. He's been dealing with a hamstring. He's definitely expected to start and play. It's not obvious he'll play 100% of snaps, but I'm not sure he's going to need to. So price-wise, I'm really struggling to make this team, frankly, much worse than a 0, and they have been that lately. And so I understand I'm making a jump, but with all this talent imported, I mean, this is like really like a seriously competitive offensive line right now, going from what was completely putrid, like not even funny how not competitive the offensive line was for 3 years, and the defensive backs as well. Now this bet, basically, I like Virginia enough to bet this. This bet's way more about Coastal, as most of my bets are about the team I'm betting against. So Coastal, from my perspective, just had this insane run out when they were the first ones spending money before NIL and breaking the rules with all that. Obviously, if you don't know about like the old billionaire coach and everything that's gone into this program, and had this crazy run with McCall really for like only 2 years. The 2023 year was no good whatsoever. And Chadwell, where everything clicked and they were like king shit, best of the best as a Sun Belt team can be, which is like, you know, definitely positive, somewhere around +5 when they were really good. I think when they beat BYU in 2020, I want to say. And like, frankly, like physically overwhelmed BYU. That game was crazy. But since it's just been a complete downhill free fall from my perspective, I don't think this head coach is real whatsoever. Now he's bringing in this Western Kentucky Mike Leach guy for offensive coordinator. A lot of this is reeking of just trying not to get fired. To be fair, both coaches are probably trying not to get fired. I think one is way likelier to keep his job at the end of the year. And yeah, they brought in 2 quarterbacks to execute this. One who basically ran a flavor of this at San Jose last year, in Emmett Brown, who actually earned the job at San Jose. And from everything I understand, was the plan for most of camp for him to be the starter. If you missed it, about a week, maybe 10 days ago, he was announced out for the year, I think with an ACL. They just said lower body injury. And so it's going to be MJ Morris, who, if you might remember from 2 or 3 years ago at NC State, he would have played in, I think, 1 game for Maryland last year. And so Tim Beck obviously recruited him to NC State years ago. I don't think he was going to play if Brown was playing. I don't think this guy can run an air raid like whatsoever. I don't know how many like college football junkies watch this. He can make big throws. Like, he's not untalented. Obviously, he's a real recruit for NC State. I don't think he sees the game of football whatsoever, like at all, and is highly prone to horrible sacks and interceptions. And when they're going to be overwhelmed as much as they're likely to be in the trenches for this game, I think they're fried. I'm calling the team. I don't even think I disagree that much with the market with where I'm putting Coastal within the Sun Belt. Probably the bigger gap is like, what do I think is a not real contender, but like a solid enough ACC team versus like a completely middling Sun Belt team. The market probably thinks it's closer to where this price was where it started. I think it's a lot more above that right now, especially with the way the portal works. So yeah, look, I believe it was on the call last year. I laid 3.5 with Virginia on the road in this game last year. So it's hard to say we're completely stealing laying 13 right now. In my opinion, laying 3.5 last year, watching that game play out, I think I made it close to 10. I was bewildered at the price. I think I would have made that more than 10 after watching it. I mean, it was just completely like these two teams play a different sport. I get it. Coastal was a disaster quarterback situation last year. As much as I dislike MJ Morris, he probably is admittedly an upgrade over that. But I see zero improvement in any of the trenches. If you want one silver lining, if you are a Coastal fan for whatever reason, I do think this defensive coordinator is real. It seems like he was a big part of what happened at Louisiana Tech, which, not to get like too distracted, but Louisiana Tech playing the level of defense they did in the last year or two was like wild to me. I think this guy might be good, but when they're outmatched physically, as they're likely to be this weekend, I don't think it means a whole lot. So I would have Coastal down in like the mid-negative teens, which, like I said, I don't even think I'm going to be against them that much in the Sun Belt. That's just kind of, I guess, where I have Sun Belt versus ACC right now compared to the market. Could it be possibly related to where I like another ACC team here? I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I'd be pretty, with all the information we have today, willing to price this game at 14.5, frankly. And if you miss the impulse, I wouldn't lay 13.5. But if you miss the impulse or it doesn't come back, I think 13 is solid enough, honestly. I'll try and speed this up because it's almost been an hour and we're not halfway done. So obviously Texas has been bet all week. I'm not saying, but obviously I did this call last year and liked Ohio State 6 a lot on a neutral. I mean, we were definitely very lucky to win the halftime with the defensive touchdown. I'm not sure we had that wrong of a side laying 6. It did not feel like the edge I thought it was going to be. Maybe 6 was efficient. I don't know. But just as a starting point, the market was screaming these teams are 6 points apart. Now, a huge part of that was Ohio State getting to this crazy level at the end of the year, playing like way above what the roster was for 12 weeks last year. And their coach basically admitting that's like their plan this whole time. A bunch of things here. So Ohio State has Matt Patricia now, defensive coordinator. I think Joel Klatt bring this up, and it made a lot of sense of what to look for here, which is last year when Texas went at Michigan early in the season against Wink Martindale, who's even more aggressive probably than Matt Patricia is likely to be here, ran a lot of max protect for their quarterback. I'd expect a lot more of that here. The move on the total makes complete sense with this clearly being by far the biggest game of either of these quarterbacks' lives. I know Manning played in the Cotton Bowl last year, but of like starting and really playing. So yeah, like on team ratings, I'd have these teams right next to each other, somewhere above a 25, less than a 30. If you want to nitpick, one's a 25 and one's a 28 and one's a 26 and one's a 27. If the edge is going to come down to like nitpicking stuff like that, I leave it alone. I do think they're pretty close. And I don't know how you wouldn't say this would be a monster home field. So I'm not betting Ohio State, since I know a lot of people are going to die to have an opinion here. I will share, if you held a gun to my head, it would be Ohio State. And frankly, even at this dog shit number, I probably would still barely lean. There could maybe be like a calorie of meat on the bone for under, like if you just really held a gun to my head. But I'm really not interested in betting anything here. And as for saying, I can watch all the film I want. Same thing as the Maryland guy. Like, there's zero replacement for seeing how he handles real games and real teams, which we're going to learn a lot about. So obviously he's preposterously talented. One of the best college football players I've ever seen is on Ohio State and Smith. Honestly, I kind of think Ohio State's roster is a little better. I really am honestly kind of dying to bet Ohio State. This O-line injury is supposed to be Texas. Spankot says probable. My understanding is that's just what Sark has been like publicly reporting. I don't know how real that is. As for Ohio State offensive coordinator change, I wouldn't care that much. I really don't think Chip Kelly had a lot to do last year. Honestly, I think he was given a lot more credit than he deserved. But this is a really weird job because my job's kind of like to judge people. So like if I sound like negative, like I'm shitting on people or like people's relatives are watching this or whatever, I'm sorry. I'm going to share my opinion. Part of pricing these games comes down to having opinions on people. And some of my opinions will be more negative than others. Nothing are like personal attacks. But yeah, I was way less impressed with Chip Kelly than a lot of the media seemed to be last year. So long way to say, I don't think that's worth much. honestly kind of think 2.5 for the start was a better number, but and maybe even 2.5 juice Iowa State. But I'm not betting it on August 29th. I think there's going to be a lot better games to bet this year. Marshall and Georgia are kind of two bet against teams for me. This is a really weird Georgia roster. I have a weird amount of questions about defensive personnel for the first time in like close to a decade for them. Just with the way the portal works, like they can't hoard first round picks as backups for 2 years like they were doing forever until 2 years ago. And so there's just question marks. It doesn't mean they'll be bad. And like, to be fair, like, you know, they came out and destroyed Clemson off the start last year. A lot of this could be, you don't see that attrition mattering until there's injuries piling up in October, November. We'll see. But I've never really been sold on this quarterback being really able to elevate a team much above like probably the mid 20, like, you know, and more in like the 25, 27 range than like 27, 29 range. And the way the roster is set up is like weirdly, by far the strength of the roster seems to be its receivers. All anybody can talk about is how much they like the receivers, but they don't really have a passer that's going to be playing for them. And there's real, by Georgia standards, real question marks about the rest. So I'm starting them out kind of more like a 20, like to me, even not knowing Sayan that well for Ohio State, like not 5 points worse than these two, but like if either of these two teams were picked against Georgia, I would bet one of those two teams today. Happy to update that opinion. And as I probably should have said at the start, like I follow all the best speculators for markets and everything. Like one of my favorites, Stan Druckenmiller. If you hear him talk about any of this, and I'll probably be the same way with these teams throughout the season, he can say, hey, this is my opinion right now at 1:16 p.m. on a Friday afternoon, but I could literally 180 this opinion in 5 hours by tonight if things in the world change. And so if I'm presented new information on this, I'm happy to quickly make Georgia 30 if there's obvious evidence that's what they are. But that's where I'd be starting them. As for Marshall, totally guessing. I mean, this coach did make a bunch of NFL players at NC State. I'm not convinced he's going to be bad. And, you know, I'm assuming it's Del Rio Wilson at quarterback. I do not like Zion Turner whatsoever. I don't really like either, and especially against Georgia. The move on the total makes all the sense in the world. I wouldn't be stunned if there's still meat on the bone. Obviously, if you don't know, 52 is relatively key. If you want to bet it, it'd have to be 52.5. I'm not. And Georgia's not showing a ton of interest with Kirby unless it's something that he's had against the coach in killing these. Even like the FCS teams where he's laying numbers like this hasn't been super into it. So, I mean, I wouldn't bet Marshall with stolen money, but like on numbers, I think I do barely lean dog and under, but God bless you if you want to get involved. So I think master of a quarterback. I'm sorry. I just said the thing about negativity, but I have to tell you what I think. I can't just sit here and say the market, you know, the number's good. I have no opinion. I can tell you what I think. I'm just going to tell you what I think. I think he's a disaster of a quarterback. I'm not the biggest fan of Gleason at all. Toledo clearly is always a complete different level of talent than every other MAC team. Whether or not they're a good football team is highly debatable, but the roster usually has them starting most week ones somewhere close to a 0, barely positive, barely negative. This would be no different. I'm right there around like a -1. Kentucky, even with a disaster at quarterback, still has enough SEC on the roster to probably keep them definitely positive, probably in the range of a +5 to a +10. I say way closer to the +5 than the +10. Meaning I could kind of see this being 6.5-ish on neutral, and this home field probably not being enough for me to get it up to 10. However, I'm not bucking this money that I want to bet Kentucky. I have no interest in betting on Gleason, but at this price, if you laid Kentucky 7, I totally get it. I think you missed any boat on this being like a crazy SEC matchup. Like, you know, there's not like this world of gap of talent on the roster from what I can see. So I think we're all guessing with Malachi Nelson. after watching Boise last night, I'd be lying if I didn't say that was a little bad, like a little weird that this guy couldn't beat out Madsen, who I really wasn't impressed with all season. But yeah, generally this coach for UTEP, I think is going to get them to be scoring enough points at some point. Let me pull up their stuff. But we're all guessing, and they have to still start in the -20s. Utah State, I'd be careful just because Mendenhall had New Mexico running decently to begin last year. I'd be careful assuming A, that that's going to happen at all, or B, that it's going to happen the way it did with like a bunch of scoring with Dampier and horrendous defense. Like at his core, Mendenhall still is a defensive guy. And listening to him talk about this team, he seems a lot more focused at building from the interior defensive line, which is where he started. I'm not betting under. There's a ton of guessing with both of these, but with all the information we have today on August 29th, I think I lean bearish on both quarterbacks. And the best I can tell with what Utah State's going to do is probably pass less than this number suggests. But like I said, I'm not on the phone with Mendenhall 5 days a week, so he can tell me this. Like I'm reading through the tea leaves and guessing, and we'll learn a lot from this game. So Colorado State's quarterback has probably played more than anybody else in the Mountain West. I'm not that into it, but he kind of is a dog, and he kind of can sling it. I don't love the mistakes he makes, but it is Colorado State. I don't know what you're expecting, like some first-round pick quarterback to be there. Seeing what Horton's doing for the Seahawks right now is a little scary, just in terms of what they would have lost. They're another team, like a bunch, frankly, who have had like crazy offensive line run out in past years that, you know, because we've all seen it probably watching this game. Like there are games where these teams, like Colorado State played Wazoo, I think 2 years ago in 2023 in like week 2 or something, where they were using like 250-pound freshmen on the offensive line. Like it was insane. And I think most people watching this call have seen enough games by now. Like when you're doing that, just every stat from the game is meaningless. Like you just can't even pretend to operate an offense or play football. And so Colorado State has plenty of those the last 2 years that have maybe dragged them down too much because this is a very real coach and the quarterback does know what he's doing. I would be probably keeping them just below San Jose State, pretty close to a -10. And like I could kind of see -9 or -8 making more sense for them. For UW, we'll see with Walters, a defensive coordinator. I'm expecting a lot of 5 down. I don't know how that really matches up against the air raid with Norvell. They're huge. They're defensive backs. I'm cool starting them in the very high single digits, like very high single digits. I probably think these teams are somewhere between a -8 and -10 and a +8 and a +10. And this game could range anywhere from where it is to lower. So to me, this current price, I think you'd be fringing on nuts to love Washington at this price. I think you've completely missed the boat. Because if you're betting this price, that's like you need to make this game 24 kind of with conviction to like really love laying this number. That seems nuts to me. I'm not betting Colorado State, but the market today at this price is expressing to me 100% confident in how good Washington can be and how bad Colorado State can be. It's like there's not a lot of room for you to be right on Washington here. All right, Hawaii moved. I'm not plugged in there. Everything public is overwhelmingly positive that Alejandro is going to play. If you don't know, Hawaii has a quarterback, and this is the case with a lot of teams right now because backup quarterback, like good backup quarterbacks, basically don't exist. Just like, you know, good left-handed pitchers in the minor leagues, excuse me, basically don't exist. They're too valuable on the market. So yeah, I'll go over what the prices would be if he's in and out hampered and everything like that. So if he's 100% healthy, which seems like a stretch, if he missed it, he's severely twisted. I think it's right ankle. It It was like a hip drop tackle. It seems very much like foot and ankle that everything was bothering him. There's all kinds of public clips of him practicing like normal. All the reports of the coach are that he's going to play. I know this is like Polynesian night in Arizona. If you don't know Arizona's coach's background, he's Colt Brennan's cousin, I believe. And from there, he wears a lei a lot of time. It's like a big, Polynesian quarterback at Arizona. Like it's a big night for the vibe. The backup's a white kid. I think he's playing. I'd be shocked. I mean, he stayed in the game against Stanford and has a week to keep going. If something was broken, I don't think he's finishing that game, and I don't think he's at practice all this week. And I think he'd care enough to play. That's just me. And if he's in 100%, I'd still have Hawaii. I think if he didn't get hurt in that game, they're like clearly the right side, even laying 2.5 in that game. Like I'd be close to making that game if it was played again the next week with full health. I mean, honestly, probably Hawaii 3.5. I know some stuff went Hawaii's game, but plenty went against them with the special teams touchdown. And obviously a lot went against them with the quarterback injury. I mean, to me, and just knowing how bad Stanford could be right now is like, bad, but it's not like they're Ball State. Like they're still Stanford. I mean, I want to be making, if Alejado is healthy, still Hawaii around like a -15, which if you're justifying Arizona at this price, you need to make it 20 or more, which would mean you need to think Arizona's up around like probably close to like where Georgia Tech is right now. Like honestly, you'd have to be pricing Arizona as like only a 2.5, 3-point dog to Washington on neutral right now, which could totally be the case. And I do kind of like both coordinators, but I'd rather see it first bit after how disastrous last year was. So yeah, I'm closer to Arizona being frankly like a 0, healthy Alejado making this game more like 16.5. If he plays and he's gimpy, which I think is what the market is expecting here, probably this is good. And if he's out, there's room to blast. I mean, I strongly think there's room to blast this if he's out. I currently would be stunned if he's out. Like, honestly, I'd probably be making this like 21.5 if he's out. Honestly, I'm not exaggerating. I don't know why people think he's out other than they saw him got hurt. It looked bad in the game and they just guessed because everything public is screaming that he's playing. Obviously playing through something, but playing. So long way to say nothing to do other than hurry to your computer if you get news that he's out. Here's another game about like reactions and stuff. So I get Fresno look horrible and I get it's Kansas. And to me, if Fresno, Kansas played again, I think that game closed like 13.5 juice. I mean,
Limit increase.
If that game's played again this week with the same players, like I'm fairly confident it's not closing less than 17. Now, how much of that was like this home run effort game from Kansas in the home opener? Maybe not nothing. I'm not super into that, but it's possible. And could Kansas be some like king shit, crazy Big 12 contender? They could. As much as I adore the coach, like it's still Kansas. I think that team is closer to like a 5 than a 10. Clearly positive, but something like that. And so, yeah, if that game needs to be 17.5 plus, that means you need to start making Fresno like clearly worse than Colorado State, like clearly maybe a touchdown worse than San Jose. It's just Fresno just hasn't been that in my life, so it's just weird. It's just hard for me to do that. But I mean, that's how they looked. They couldn't cross the 50 in the second half when like Kansas is playing prevent. Not like they want to give up a concession, but it's not the end of the world. It's not like they're pitching a shutout or had anything to play for. So, look, it's one game. They're probably not going to look worse than that. I do think the Fresno coach is intelligent on defense. I think the USC defensive coordinator is really good, and I think he learned a lot last year working there with him. But yeah, they're clearly worse than -10. I don't want to start dragging Fresno to like a -15, but they're clearly worse than a -10. Georgia Southern, I'm going to be starting out pretty similar to where I have Fresno. Now, I don't think that's enough to bet Fresno because I'm just guessing way too much. But with Georgia Southern, I mean, and that, sorry to get all over the place with the Kennesaw game, but that's another thing. If this guy Williams for Kennesaw couldn't play over JC French, who I don't think sees football at all, that's like a real red flag to me. And he's never really played like real football. Like this is easily the best team he's ever played in a football game, Williams tonight. Anyways, I'm not into it at all. I'm not really into the coach, to be completely honest. But they are still like relatively enough competitive in the Sun Belt. They obviously they beat Marshall last year, a fluke miracle, but they did win. And yeah, I'd be closer to like Fresno 1.5 than this, but I have no interest in betting that until we see more Fresno. Because I mean, if you told me that they're just like ready to go get dragged down to like, I'm not putting them with like New Mexico and stuff, and like they're clearly easily above like Wyoming, I think. Maybe not. But like I guess it's logical if they give enough data points. Like it's within the realm of biology that Fresno could be like a Hawaii level team. Like that could happen. So and if that's the case, then like Georgia Southern's actually a fraction cheaper, but I'm not into it. I saw Utah got given out like an hour before this. Kind of agree. Utah, they're good with Rising and everything, was playing to like easily into the plus 20s, like easily. Last year was just like an insane run out. Same thing. It's like probably what this person, the individual, I can just say Joey Toons gave it out on his public chat is why I saw move it from 5.5. I think that makes sense. Like, they're another team where a lot of the games from last year just mean less than nothing with what they were doing at quarterback, especially I think the Colorado game, like everything at the end last year. And I think this quarterback can play, and they're importing like everything with the offensive coordinator where I think it should click relatively right away, like 2021 Western Kentucky was, like Indiana last year was with Sinceri. We'll see, but I would basically always bet on them with this defensive coordinator being competent. And I really want to start them like pretty decently above a 10. Like if they played Washington right now on a neutral, like, and the game was pick, I would bet Utah, which means they're I know maybe I'm not right, but that would mean my number would need to make them like a 12.5, which feels right. Like that's totally where Utah can be on like frankly a down year with this guy. And this guy does not blow smoke up his team's ass. Like all he's saying is that this is the best offensive line they've ever had there on paper. I mean, I'll believe him until there's a reason not to. And as for Nico, like I really think last year was a much bigger disaster than a lot was made of it. Just him reading defenses, especially like what Scalley's going to throw. And he's never really had to make decisions. Like, look at how these guys go on from all the way back with UCF. Like, Mackenzie Milton's not going and winning NFL. Like, even back to like Drew Lock and stuff. Like, these guys aren't skilled decision makers because they're not learning how to run like real offense that you run in real football. So this guy's never done it. He's played high school football and then, poorly executed like the easiest offense for a quarterback to run last year. UCLA was easily negative most of the year last year in power ratings, and I really wouldn't be using much home field here. Utah has in past years mattered a lot with home road splits because of all the motion stuff they do before the snap with needing to be able to yell and signal stuff. I'm not frankly that worried about that in this game. I think laying 5.5 definitely made sense. Honestly, I'd probably be making this game 7, which if I really am with enough conviction, then even 6 would be good. I just, in week 1, don't need to be chasing a bunch of action on stuff where admittedly we're going to learn a lot about both teams in this. This Northwestern game, both coaches have talked about weather possibly mattering. So, first I can just say, all the guys talked about, I don't think Sullivan's going to be able to play for them. It's not really a secret. he's been running Retzlaff with the ones for like weeks in all the public practices. Like this has been Jake Retzlaff for 2 or 3 weeks. I don't think anything I just said is meaningful, but just so you're aware, I'm expecting Retzlaff to start and the Ball State guy to be the backup. Tulane and really everything Summerall's done for the last 3 years has easily been positive, like a positive power rating. And frankly, I think Northwestern was probably a lot worse than people realized last year, not to be mean. But I'm guessing on Tulane because, I mean, this guy did just come in late, like a month ago. A lot of people have liked under here. So Summerall's talked about how huge the Northwestern offensive line is. They are. Last year, Preston Stone did play snaps against Tulane, or sorry, 2 years ago. I think something happened with the guy. There were people around SMU. If you remember, SMU got bet against the first 2 games, I'm pretty sure, of last year at Nevada. And I forget the second game. And part of that was Preston Stone looking horrible all of camp, really, and then in those games as well, before Jennings started playing. It wouldn't shock me if Northwestern again didn't get first picks at a bunch of quarterbacks and had to settle with him, but we'll see. But I'm no massive fan of Retzlaff either. Like I kind of thought he was a scam. Like the second he had to play real teams at the end with BYU was pretty ugly, and he's insanely turnover prone. So there's people who like under. It makes sense to me. I think these quarterbacks could both be a little bit too much of a chaos agent for it to be excellent at this price. It's down enough in my opinion, but monitor the weather. We'll learn a bunch. Mississippi State at 13 or less, honestly, would have been a full 1 unit bet, and even at 13 and a half, if it was more painted, I would be tracking that right now for half a unit. Obviously, Mississippi State, Levy is another guy running this Art Briles stuff, like Kennesaw, Tennessee, Ole Miss, all of them. 450, and I think they probably can. So all Huff has talked about in all these press conferences is how worried he is of this game. He's one of these who I've been listening to all these coaches every single week for years. I'd like to think I could tell a little when they're just like bullshitting to bullshit, or if there's actual problems. I think he's legitimately concerned about this game, and I think reasonably so. So Southern Miss was way in like the low -20s. Like honestly, I mean, not really a different rating from Kennesaw last year. I mean, maybe they would have been 2.5 versus Kennesaw or something like that on neutral. I mean, not more than that. Now, it's all new players. Almost nothing from that whole year last year means anything. But I think some people are getting carried away with just assuming the Marshall guy brings his quarterback and his 10 favorite teammates. It's just going to click like Indiana last year. I don't think that's how this works. I also don't think Braylon Braxton can play against like real SEC teams. I think he's more than good and like a very, very talented runner who can execute this downhill stuff, you know, when they're playing teams like the low tier of the Sun Belt, like they played last year. But they're playing like a real SEC team. And all Huff has talked about is how not really knowing what their depth is this year. They have not been tackling in practice. In past years, he would have liked to have tackled, but he couldn't this year because he was worried about the depth and he couldn't risk injuries. So he's been pretty vocal about how he is really worried about how the tackling is going to go against an SEC team who goes a million miles an hour, who basically thrives on these huge, massive, explosive plays after you get exhausted of defending them 50 plays and a half and then breaking a bunch of tackles in the second half. I mean, it's a disaster setup for them. So yeah, price-wise, I'd be another one with Mississippi State too, where like 8 of their games mean nothing when they're using a horrible quarterback last year. With Shapen and what Levy has done in his life, I mean, like especially honestly, like how good the Oklahoma stuff aged, like with what Oklahoma was able to do with him, and then look what they did on offense last year. Like I think that age is really good for Levy. I'm cool making Mississippi State to start a 0, and Southern Miss is like well into the negative teens. Like honestly, I'd be making this more than 14 still. It's just with this current price, you're not stealing whatsoever. Could this move more? I don't know, but it's probably one where like, unless it's super explosive, like and clearly missing a big injury or something, if some computer model person or whoever happened to like Southern Miss and 13.5 came back, this would be one I'd be comfortable fading a move, which is not something I do a lot 24 hours before a game. But that would be cheap enough for me. So what's my number? I would say it's a 0 versus -17, where the number plays up with tempo, where Mississippi State's built to kick the shit out of them. And the home field is probably -0.5 to -1. I mean, I don't think I'm blowing up a lot here. One of the best bets in sports is double-digit favorites in college football. It's kind of armed itself out the last year or so, but you don't have to take my word for it. You can just go look at the close at Pinnacle or whatever for the last decade. There's no home in these games, and the reason is really these games. Like, it's different when it's like Bama at Mississippi State, for example.
Limit increase.
Where there is some crowd noise still. But on these games where the crowd just goes away, and I could do a whole stream on like what home field even comes from. But without doing the math of all that and just hand waving it away, home in football is a decent portion of it is crowd noise pretty clearly, which is a little interesting because it's pretty clearly zero part of baseball home field. But I'll do a different video about that on a different day. And yeah, like honestly, I'd be making this closer to 17 than 14. Probably 16.5 is a better number. And probably I should have laid 14, but yeah, we'll see if it comes back. So total's been bet enough. I've seen enough on both sides actually with the total. And some dog money. Kiff has come out and said that they have had offensive line injuries and tight end injuries, and said, honestly, this is one of our more injured training camps leading up into this. Trying to organize where to price them. I think this quarterback might be really good. Honestly, I think I've seen him in the 30 to 1s-ish range. Just with, I don't know how to make a good probability for Heisman's and all these, but my best guess on how to do it would be that in the 30s to 1 for Simmons to win Heisman is probably not atrocious. I think this guy's as talented as Dart. If you know nothing about him, he's kind of like one of these Todd Marinovich guys where the dad's just like molded him since he was an infant into this pro athlete. Like early graduated 2 years. Like he's, I think, already graduated in college. He's like a teenager. And way ahead. He throws gas on the mound. And I just think he has like a really, really, really talented arm. And they obviously are designed to score a gazillion points a game. They kick the shit out of like these horrible FCS teams at the start of last year. Georgia State is not that. This Georgia State quarterback, once they like fully committed to him, does have some like competition to him to where I'm to be clear, 0% interested in Georgia State in this game. But in Sun Belt games, could see him being competitive. But yeah, I'd be starting Ole Miss probably pretty close to a +20. Their games play pretty true with how fast they go and how much they keep scoring. Kiffin's another one who's usually pretty obviously aware of the spread. And Georgia State, I'd be having like, a little behind Georgia Southern, probably like pretty close to the negative. So if you think there's any home, and I kind of do, it's actually gotten fractionally cheap. I'm not really betting Ole Miss, especially with the uncertainty with the offensive line injuries. EMU, I really don't like Kim at all, the quarterback. It seems like he's won the job. Texas State's going to have Brad Jackson, this freshman, starting. I think that might be a good thing. I wish I reacted quicker to this last year with Mensa for Tulane, with it being a sign that he could win the job as a freshman. I feel like if anything, there's a bias towards them not winning. And so if he could outcompete Yarnell, who's far from special, but, probably came in as the incumbent, if you had to bet on it in April, probably means something that he played well. Or it could be that Yarnell was horrendous. I'm not plugged in enough. Texas State's actually really well covered by this guy. I think his last name's Chardello. He posted a video today breaking down the roster. Honestly, both of these teams are weirdly well covered for how bad they are. I'll start Texas State clearly in a different category than like the Georgia State, Georgia Southerns in the Sun Belt, probably by at least a touchdown, but still, I think, clearly negative. One big no for this game with handicapping wise, I don't think it's random. Kinney, the Texas State coach, if you don't know, is basically family with this guy, Trailer. Like they're like brother or like son and father close. And from a family tragedy, I won't go into it, but they care infinite about that game next week where they play each other. Last year, Texas State against Lamar held a ton back, basically did nothing and just ran the clock out. Are they good enough to do that against EMU or that would play into this number? Maybe. I mean, EMU is not exactly like improving year over year. I'd be having them pretty solidly in the negative teens and would probably be making this game on ratings like a -5-ish versus a -16-ish, calling it 11 with some home and travel to make it a little lower than this. And then knowing that handicap angle, knowing what Texas State did with the Lamar game, pretty solidly leaning Eastern Michigan, to be honest, but not enough for me to bet. And I would rather watch this quarterback play. All we've seen of Ty Simpson really is a completely atrocious USF game in the with some extenuating circumstances. So the USF game had like a complete monsoon, and there were some huge, I'll just say like culture issues from what I hear from within of like basically benching Milroe for how he's handled some meetings that week. And some of that was not decided till later in the week. So I don't know how prepared for that he was. I don't know how much to hold that against him. I was not overly impressed. The pedigree is obviously awesome. And basically everything around him is awesome. And to me, the game, it sounds super casual and reductionist to say, but like it really does come down to him. Because if, like I'll just do it, if he was Milroe, I'd be really confidently having Bama like right with these teams and like favored over Georgia on a neutral. Womack, the defensive coordinator, does a lot. It's pretty involved. I think it matters a lot that they return most of it. I don't think it's the easiest install from what they were doing with Saban to just 180 into that. Means something. And obviously they have probably the second best offensive player in the sport behind Ohio State. So with Williams, to be clear. So yeah, I mean, they're at least a +25, I think. Florida State, we're completely guessing. I've never really been a big fan of Malzahn, at least since the title run with Nick Marshall. I can't believe that year happened still. I'm also pretty troubled by Castellanos. I know he was originally recruited here. I think he even went here. But Bill O'Brien's made a lot of shit quarterbacks work in his time. I think he's won playoff games with like TJ Yates in the NFL. Like I think Bill O'Brien's one of the most underrated coaches in the world. I think he's really good with offenses. For things to not work there is pretty troubling to me, and for things to not really miss a beat when they went to Grayson James, I think is his name, the FIU guy last year. It's not like these awesome green flags to me that this guy's some crazy college quarterback I need to care a ton about to elevate this team out of what was clearly a negative team last year. So Florida State's buffer range on what they could be is like 10 points, frankly, in either direction for me. I strongly lean towards keeping them a little lower, to be honest. I think outside of like a Sun run year where a lot worked for them, not a lot has gone great for this coach. I'd probably be making this higher, but I don't remotely know enough about Simpson to want to lay it in what's going to be obviously a big atmosphere. So it got fixed. A&M would have been a bet for me. If you were part of that move, I would keep it, even if it got to 24. To be clear, I'm not saying to bet A&M now, and it's not. But I think this is a pretty real team with an extremely serious offensive line, an extremely good coach, and a team that honestly was a game away from the playoff last year. I'd be pretty close to calling them a highly competitive SEC team around a 20. And San Antonio is clearly negative. I mean, like basically inarguably. Obviously, when they had Frank Harris and all these, like they had Burford on the Niners and Woolen on the Seahawks and all these people, they had them rolling in like 22, maybe 21. They started being good. 23, they're like clearly a positive team, but they have not been that in a long time. And he has completely thrown in the towel in these games. Like if you look at UTSA against Texas, I think both of the last 2 years, and all these games where they're, 3, 4, 5 score underdogs. He's completely thrown it in with injuries. No team, for whatever reason, has been more injured in fall camp. Like each of the last 5 years, they've just gotten brutalized internally in practices. And he's like completely
limit increase
in these big number games where they're just physically outcompeted. So if this is not competitive, not to front run myself on a second half, but they could give up. It's happened a lot. And I know he cares a lot more about next week, like this Texas State guy. From my perspective, people are getting a little loony with his Rice love. Like, I'm not betting Lala, to be clear, but because it's novel or whatever, people are really into this Rice coach because he ran some triple option out of the pistol at Davidson. I don't know. I went back and watched their games. Like, it's really easy to watch their game against Georgetown last year. It didn't look like some crazy PhD level thing to me. I've listened to all their things. I'm not saying he's going to fail or be bad. And, to succeed at Rice, you probably want to try something weird. But, it's not like I'm just slobbering over this guy thinking he's going to be like, the savior of the Rice program. Like, and honestly, a lot of this seems like a weird thing to try and execute in year one. And, they've been really bad ever since JT Daniels got hurt. So, I'd be having them like really negative teens, like very close to a negative 20 to start. And Lala, when they had their quarterbacks healthy until the end, had like a pretty dominant Sun Belt offensive line and run game and played really real football, like pretty damn close to a 0, like close to as good as Sun Belt team gets. I'm not saying this game should be 20. I don't think that. This plays way down with the tempo and pace. But honestly, like I'm at 10, I definitely get massively interested in Lala. I'm frankly already a little, and I do make the number higher than what it is now, but I haven't bet it. I'm not going to pretend to have an opinion. It was going to take, the craziest information in the world for me to bet this game in either direction. So I'm not going to lie to any of you. I have not done enough research on Missouri State to have an intelligent comment here. I'm not going to waste our time. So I've heard ball knowers explain a key to this LSU game being what Clemson Riley, his brother, like Garrett Riley, does with motions in to isolate where Perkins starts on defense. And that matters a lot more in college than NFL, obviously, with the hashes. And from my perspective, that's totally what Lincoln Riley is the best at. USC, Oklahoma, everything has been that part of pre-snap football. And it totally makes sense that they might be able to do that with LSU. Now, if LSU is just going to be spamming 3-3-5, I think that plays a big role, and none of us really know unless you're inside the building at LSU, which I am not. So from the ball knowledge side of handicapping this game, I think you can't guess until you see it, and maybe you could do it at halftime. But I don't see anything to do yet. On ratings, I have these teams pretty close. If LSU is a new quarterback, I would say this really is some like monster 3.5, 4 point home field. With this guy playing as many road legit SEC games as he has, and Nussmeier, to be clear, like I'm not really near that number. And so to me, this number is saying the market is like very definitively Clemson's like quite certainly a different category of team than LSU. Well, that's strong language, but like, clearly let's call it 1.5, 2 points better than LSU. To me, that's maybe a little strong, but not nearly strong enough for me to have a ton of LSU interest. So I guess at 4.5, if you held a gun to my head, I'd barely lean dog, but there's almost no chance I bet this game. For halftime and everything, it would make a lot of sense to watch, even how Weeks is moving off the injury and everything too with the linebackers. Like that, the linebacker manipulation with formations is definitely what I'll be paying attention to for Clemson on offense. Another freshman quarterback, if you missed it, at Cal, the freshman quarterback is going to play. I consider that a good thing. I think the Ohio State guy, Brown, is like, again, I'm sorry I'm so negative, but like miserable at football, like miserable. Every snap he's ever played in college has been horrible from my perspective. So at least there's a chance this works. I think both of these coaches might be a little underrated. They definitely can coach defenses. I kind of like Malik Murphy. I kind of like both quarterbacks. I don't despise either team, to be honest. clearly they're, fringing on the range of a 0. They could be anything depending on the season runs out between -5 and a +5. I think this actually is a very underratedly big home field, especially for a true freshman, but I'm completely guessing on how this guy's going to handle it. I will say, because it's on Spank Odds, this receiver Clemens is supposed to matter a lot for Oregon State. I think he was going to be their best or second best receiver this year, but in my opinion, that's more than priced in at this point. Just on like traditional old school handicapping, with it being by far the biggest game of the Cal quarterback's life and never really playing in noise like that, I'd probably lean dog and under. I already kind of do on numbers, but it's not enough to get involved. The South Carolina running back is cleared to play. That's not even on here. Rasul Faison's his name. I'm worried there's like a lot of hype with South Carolina. The NFL guys that lost last year are really good. Even the ones who didn't get drafted, and even the ones who got cut in the NFL in the last 7 days, like all of them are invited back to practice squads. Like I think they had a lot of real SEC trench players last year. And just a lot to replace. But this quarterback can clearly play. They're obviously, meaningfully positive, above probably a positive 10. With Virginia Tech, I don't know what to do with these coordinators. I was not a big fan of Philip Montgomery at Tulsa. We'll see how he is as a coordinator. It's quite a vibe shift versus what's been going on there. I don't think the defensive coordinator matters a lot. Like Pry is the whole reason he got this job, is running that defense. I don't know how relevant that is or isn't. I guess we'll learn from the first game. In terms of matchups, I don't see anything strong there. To be honest, I probably would think 7 slightly better than 7.5 as the market's inching towards, but 0 reason for me to bet this game. Another guess with a new quarterback. So I guess I'll start with Notre Dame. They ran out really good with playing a crazy amount of backup quarterbacks, and to be fair, kicking the shit out of them. But it was hard going into the playoff what I should really do with them. And was closer to like the lower +20s than like the mid +20s that they were in some game. Now, it didn't really cost me. Like, we won with Ohio State against them, and I wasn't on them against Penn State. But to be honest, I did lean Penn State pretty strongly in that Orange Bowl, and that result surprised me a little, and they've kind of impressed me the whole last 4 or 5 games they played last year. After seeing what they did, I don't want to translate this perfectly into the Texas A&M game they played in week 1 last year, but there are a lot of similarities in terms of, first off, I don't expect some crazy monster crowd in this stadium. I mean, it's never really had one in years. Obviously, it's a big game. I expect it to be full. I'm not expecting this for home field, let's say. And they kind of probably can lean on them and kind of treat the game how they did the A&M game. We'll see. Carr seems to be very talented, but I don't like guessing on how these guys are going to see the sport of football until I see it. I think you really can learn a lot from one single data point in one game. Beck looked completely beyond atrocious last year for most of the year. I don't know how much was injury related. A lot of Miami people are saying he looks really good this year. I'm super dubious of what these weapons are. It's obviously mathematically impossible for them to be better on offense this year, or as close as you can be to impossible, and like pretty close to mathematically impossible for them to be worse on defense than they were last year. And so the move on the total due to that math makes sense. But at this point, I think that's more than priced in. I want to start Miami in the high teens. Notre Dame, I'm totally guessing on Carr, somewhere around a 22, 23, if he's anything near the tier of Riley Leonard. I'd probably make this closer to 3 if you need action on the big Sunday night game of the week. 2.5 juice is not an awful bet to me on Notre Dame, but it's not a thing I'm going to track. I haven't bet it. I don't plan to. One more really big guessing game, then I'll do the NFL and wrap this up. I don't know if I'll have time for questions. This ended up longer than I thought. my best guess on you. So Gio Lopez can play. Like he makes plays. It's been in the Sun Belt. One of the biggest bets of my life, I think the biggest bankroll percent bet of my life, was Troy against South Alabama 2 years ago. Gio Lopez's first game. And so I've just paid a lot of close attention to him for a while. I'm worried he'll make mistakes against a defensive coordinator like what TCU has. You're completely guessing on what they've coached into this. I have no idea what Kitchens is going to run on offense, how fast they're going to go. TCU is another literal Browse team. His son is the offensive coordinator. There's a little bit too much love, I think, on the TCU quarterback in media, but not in the market, because this actually is low compared to what some public stuff would have. Hoover's a really good passer, like clearly. I'm not really yet convinced he's a good quarterback. And honestly, they had a lot of like NFL weapons around him last year and like high blue chip recruits and stuff around him to play with. That is nowhere near what they have this year in terms of just explosion and what they can do with the ball. So yeah, I'm probably a little low on both teams. My best conservative guess for UNC is going to be barely positive. And I'd probably have TCU somewhere around +7 out of respect for the coaches more than anything. And, a good enough quarterback. If you want to call it 5 or 6 on a neutral, maybe 4 here is better than 3.5. I wouldn't blame you, but I have zero interest in betting this. And anyone who has a strong conviction on the total, unless you're talking to Belichick or Kitchens, who I know isn't saying shit to you, I just think you're falling. Like it's a crazy game to bet, in my opinion. As is this current price. Switching to NFL really quick. I think Philly's pretty easy to price. Honestly, they're probably a 5.5. If you're bullish, which honestly I'd probably lean a little bullish, they might be a 6. I mean, this roster is immaculate. If you dislike them, if you're stupid and don't think Hurts is good for some reason, maybe they're a 5. But I think it's wiser to not be stupid. Dallas, it's hard to make negative. I mean, that'd be insane. Parsons is probably the most important non-quarterback in the world. To me, that was already more than priced in. Like there was some 6.5 juice 4 or 5 days ago before all this news that I thought made sense to lay. Not because I was honestly kind of shocked at the trade yesterday. Not because I didn't think that was going to happen. It just seemed like there was a 0% chance he was going to play in this specific game on a Thursday. Maybe if it was Monday, there's a chance. Who knows? That said, I'm not even sure if it's public yet, but I have not yet confirmed whether he's playing here yet or not. It says probable. Maybe that's because news. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's been more than taken care of by the market. So, in my opinion, this game is really easy to price around here, around a 7. Honestly, probably it's moved a little too much from that when it was already beginning to get priced in. I don't know how you make Dallas that much better than a 3, which you would have to do to bet, like really love betting them at 7. That feels impossible. If you make them a 0, maybe you could bet Philly. That also feels impossible. Dallas is right there in between the two. I'm pretty confident beating this game. Could maybe be 7 or 6.5 juice. If you love the other side, could maybe 7.5. And now, just because power ratings are perfect doesn't mean the number's perfect. You could totally have some edge on handicap or ball knowledge or motivation or something. I just have no clue what on earth you could be seeing here to love this game. So this game seems like completely insane to bet to me. I'm not even going to pretend to have a lean. I don't. Good luck if you bet it. And sorry if I wasted time. But yeah, I'll recap. I like Wake Forest for a half bet tonight. Virginia for a half bet tomorrow. I'm not going to have time for all the questions and comments here, but there's a lot. Thank you for making it this far. And I'll do a better job of getting the questions in beforehand to prepare and leave some time for this. And I don't think they'll all be this long, but I did just want to put that intro at the beginning. So thanks for making this far if you have. Looks like a lot of people are still. And see you next week.